and I wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to life in this city and this region. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. Thank you so much for being here today to celebrate Canberra's very, very first inaugural Stella Day Out. And I'd like to thank Katrina Pearson from Harry Hartog, who's somewhere at the back, Canberra Writers Festival, and of course BJ Silcox, the director of Canberra Writers Festival, for helping to make this event possible. I'd also like to thank our wonderful funders, Graham Anderson and Nita Apsis, who funded this particular project here in Canberra. So since 2012, Stella has elevated the voices of women and non-binary writers. Our organisation's flagship program is the Stella Prize, now in its 13th year, and it celebrates Australian women and non-binary writers. We promote books by Australian women and non-binary writers, support greater participation in the world of literature, and create a more equitable and vibrant national culture. Stella also delivers a suite of year-round initiatives which tackle gender bias in the literary sector and connect outstanding books with readers. Stories and provocative ideas are at the core of Stella, and that's what we fight for. The more we read, the more kindred, compassionate and attuned we are to our world. So Stella Day Out is the free one-day literature festival. It celebrates our incredible 129 Stella listed authors. There's been 144 books that have been long-listed, shortlisted or won, and there's 129 authors. So Stella Day Out is an initiative to support and continue to support all the writers that have been listed. And we've so far done this exact Stella Day Out in Hobart, Melbourne, Brisbane, regional New South Wales in Curban, and we're about to go to Sydney, regional New South Wales Orange, and then Perth and Darwin and Adelaide. So the idea is that the Stella Day Out can be a truly national event celebrating our writers. So thank you for coming along today, and I'm now just going to introduce those two women who need no introduction. Virginia Hausinger AM is a passionate women's advocate and communications specialist with unique expertise in leading powerful conversations. She's also an award-winning television journalist, writer and commentator whose extensive media career spans 30 years. Thank you, Virginia. And Virginia is going to introduce Biff, and then I'm going to leave you both to take away the conversation. Thank you. And I just wanted to also let everyone know your program, the program for the for the Canberra Writers Festival is on your chairs. Hurry up! We've heard that already $10,000 worth of tickets, $20,000 worth of tickets are already sold. So we don't want you to miss out on your favourite event. So have a look at the program and be sure to purchase some tickets. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Fiona. I'm delighted and very, very honoured to be an ambassador for the Stella Women's Writing Prize. It is such a joy to work with Fiona and her team, and very, very exciting too, of course. And wonderfully, it puts me in this fantastic position of interviewing one of my heroes, Biff Ward. Biff, as Fiona said, probably needs very little introduction, so I'll keep it very short and sweet and simple. Biff is a national treasure. I adore her. I'm in awe of what she has done, and I might just add to it was one of the great joys of my life. On the 15th of March of 2021, Biff and I stood on stage together at the March for Justice outside Parliament House, and together faced into the crowd, and it was a very, very special moment for me. When I first moved to Canberra, I was writing columns for the Canberra Times. Biff, one way or another, reached out to me, and I must admit, the first time I went to visit her in her home, I was actually quite scared of her. Scared of this woman I knew was a phenomenal feminist and activist, a peace activist. She had a very big reputation as a formidable player in the activism spaces, and I was a little nervous as I walked into her backyard. She was, of course, utterly gorgeous and utterly embracing, and we've been friends ever since, and I'm very grateful for that friendship. Biff has also, and if you haven't seen Rays and Hussies, I celebrates the extraordinary work of second wave feminists, the women's liberation movement in Australia, and a handful of women, Biff being one of them, and including the great Elizabeth Green, who also is a Canberra resident. Now, Biff is the author of a number of works, in particular 3 works of non-fiction. She's also the co-author of a book of poetry and editor of the Feminist Chronicle, which I'm not sure we'll get to speak a lot about today, but if you haven't seen it, Julia, Women's Liberation, I've been doing a lot of research in this area, I'm writing about it at the moment, the book I'm doing, and this was one of the most revealing, insightful accounts, useful accounts I've had. I've been lucky enough to come across about women's liberation in Australia. Really phenomenal piece of work. And Biff edited that and pulled together Julia Ryan, of course, being one of Biff's dear friends. And Julia Ryan, of course, being the daughter of famous icon Edmund. So we're going to touch on, in particular, and Biff was also the author of numerous essays and articles on feminist theory, and as I said, also poetry. But we're going to touch on specifically 3 of her books. They've been were very powerful reads for me. I want to ask you first and foremost, of your books, which is your most precious? Actually, Biff, I think we probably should use one. I'm so sorry. I forget about the microphone. Here. How's that? Is that...
No. I do beg your pardon. I'm not used to using microphones.
That's on
Is that right?
What's my favourite?
No, it's what, of your books, which is the most precious to you, if that's possible to answer?
So I can't choose one. They're all precious in special ways. So Father Daughter Rape encapsulates my lifelong passion to work against sexual predation. There's no way I can put that lower down anywhere. And In My Mother's Hands is my personal story. It's the story that I had to tell after I'd done the therapy for it, be able to, and so it's personally very, very precious. And Third Chopstick is also precious because it's about war, and that's been my other passion. I'll tell you a secret. When I turned 50, the week after I turned 50, I realised that I've been carrying the most enormous hubris because I actually had to, at 50, realise, let myself see that I wasn't going to be part of the people who stop war in my lifetime. So my passion for anti-war work has been very great, and that's part of the book I wrote about Vietnam War, central to it.
Let's start with Father Daughter Rape, being the first publication. So Father Daughter Rape was published in 1984. This was the first book of its kind, not only in Australia, but I believe in the Western world, that dealt with the issue.
There was a parallel one came out in America at the same time called Lawrence Rush.
Right. But it was certainly absolutely new material for Australia, talking about child sexual abuse, and in particular, abuse within families. I have to say, when you first gave me this book years ago and I did read through it, because I think the language of child sexual exploitation, predation, abuse was more familiar, I didn't really pick up on how raw this book is. And I've recently gone back and reread it and was shocked at how raw it is. We didn't have the language we have now, and we didn't have the templates for discussing these issues. And we include some incredibly difficult to read case studies. What was the impact of this book that was published?
Well, I didn't see much impact myself, but I have reason to believe it has an impact. Back in 84, there were no writers' festivals. We got one small review about 6 inches long in Australia, and that was it. I did go on a book tour, but I think all the journalists I was talking to were in absolute shock because nobody had heard of this topic then, just not at all. And the measure of change that it might have contributed to is that when it came out in 84, whatever all the docs and facts departments in various states were doing, by 1986, 2 years later, they had all shifted to have a 95% focus on child sexual abuse. So begs the question, what were they doing before? But there was this sort of revolution in the welfare area, and I think that most people, even workers in that situation, were in shock because this has gone from completely not existing in anyone's mind to being right in your face. And people have told me that, people in those departments were reading my book. But just after it came out, I moved to I was 3, so I was a long way away, and I wasn't part of that world. So I think there would be a lot of feedback with that.
It's extraordinary to think because I did find myself when I was rereading it recently, what would have been the impact if this was published now, particularly given the warmth of some of the stories that are shared? It's so painful to read. I'm not even sure that it would be published now. And I found myself thinking about social media and how some of this material could be used and even weaponised. I felt very sad about that. But also it made me think too about how, quite frankly, how traumatic it must have been writing this book and sitting and taking the interviews that you did with some of the women who spoke so honestly with you. And they told stories that they'd never told before and that they didn't even understand themselves. Was it traumatic?
I just want to pop in here that preparing for this today, I'm preparing for this today, I realised that I did those interviews then, I was giving interviews with veterans and that privilege I get, the amazing feeling from doing interviews where people tell you stories and they're told anyone else. It's not traumatic for me. It's like this great huge gift, and it's central. It's the lifeblood that feeds into the story.
I fully understand that. I think this is explain why I'm a journalist, why I became a journalist, because it gives you that, it's like a badge when you say to someone, I'm a journalist, a badge to ask all the questions that your curiosity is driving you to ask, and people answer. And for many people on various occasions, it actually can be incredibly cathartic to tell someone. Did you find that with these women when they were telling their stories?
Very much, very much. Well, most of those women were friends or turned out, no one knew this before as part of their story, and friends of friends. A lot of them, people in the women's movement, people in the refuges. I'll just tell that story briefly. I was working in Canberra Women's Refuge when the first ever family who was escaping child sexual abuse came in. They may not have been the first family, but the first family who said it. And it was a mother and 3 children. It was mainly the 11-year-old girl who had been raped and so on by her 17-year-old stepbrother. So that was the kind of picture of the family. And I had an experience in America a few months before, which was really around the first ever incest clinic, it was called, and I've been asking women who worked there, what's this about? And eventually I said, how are these girls who are coming? And she said, well, most of them are 12-year-old bitches who seduce their fathers. So, and I knew enough from my Canberra Women's Liberation talking and being here in Women's Liberation Australia, like, that's wrong, it's wrong. said, I look after this girl, and every week I went back to the staff meeting, it's not working, I'll try this. And eventually, I thought somebody must have worked this out somewhere. So I went to the National Library to start looking. And what I found was the only materials, with one or two exceptions coming out of America, was over 80 years from Freud in 1896 to 1980 of clinical and criminological information articles, all of which basically blame the mother and or the daughter and exonerated the father. So that's really what this book is about. And I use the term father-daughter rape because, as Virginia says, there was no language. And what I was finding was that the perpetrators were fathers, stepfathers, uncles, grandfathers, and trusted neighbour. So they were trusted neighbours, and so I call them the fathers. And I talk the mothers and use a kind of archetypal family to explain this phenomenon I was uncovering.
In terms of what's changed, again, just reading it recently, one of the case studies that I found so shocking, a daughter whose father was regularly raping her, and she went, she submitted because she didn't know what else to do. She didn't know whether, she didn't even understand that this was necessarily wrong, but it didn't feel right. But what struck me was when I had sat at the press club in 2021, when our new Australian of the Year, Grace Tame, addressed the press club, and she spoke very, very clearly about the rape that she had endured from her school teacher, who was 53, Grace was 15 at the time. And it was almost the way she described her confusion about what was happening and her confusion about the power relationship and submitting to this, and even at times feeling special because he sought her out, was exactly the same as a couple of these case studies. And again, it just struck me how here we are all these years later and we're still here.
Just to go back to your earlier question, one story I did hear, one of those people who told me the story, and I think
Just hold Mark directly like that.
So, I think it may have been that story Virginia just referred to. One of the women in this book told me later that when she tried to tell her mother what had happened, she didn't believe her. She left home and went back to tell her mother, and she left a copy of my book on her mother's bed. So that was just nuts.
I'll move on to another important book. In My Mother's Hands was longlisted for the Stella Prize in 2015 and published in 2014. This is on the cover, it says a disturbing memoir of family life. I think it's a whole lot more than that. You grew up with a mother who you watched go progressively mad, madder, and you never understood why. It was a big family secret, it was held very tightly. There was also the unexplained death of your older sister when she was a baby, 4 months old. She drowned in a bathtub. And eventually your mother was diagnosed with paranoid
She
schizophrenia.
actually had, my father had been told way early, where I was born, that she was, they thought, an incurable paranoid schizophrenic and he should leave her.
And not only did he not leave her, but he worked very hard to keep her out of
Houses of Bedlam.
What is extraordinary, everything's extraordinary about this book, but the secret that you grew up with, that you, as you expressed time and time again, you didn't think that anyone else outside could necessarily see it. And so it was a family secret, you held it within the family. Meanwhile, your father, Russell Ward, who goes on to become a famous historian, academic, publishes The Great Australian Legend, was a member of the Communist Party, or by this stage, a former member of the Communist Party. is under surveillance by ASIO, so you're quite used to your family being watched, and ASIO cars sitting out the front. It was quite an extraordinary life. Your father's life was, he was gregarious, you adored him, he was also a womaniser, but he did stick by your mum. But anyway, your mother eventually goes on to live despite an incredibly shocking battle with mental health, mental illness, and attempts to kill herself. She lives a long life. She dies, I think, about 83, and she dies naturally in her sleep. Now, I want to ask you just firstly why you wrote the book. I know you said that you did 23 years of therapy yourself, so you didn't need to do therapy on the page. So why write the book?
Because it was a story in me that I had to tell. You know, the writer urge is unstoppable. And I had been writing little bits of it. Nearly all my, since I was 40, I've been in writers' groups. Wherever I lived, I was in a writers' group. And I'd written several bits of memories. And when I finished that therapy and thought, I'm going to write this book now, I found several pieces that are in there, part of that story that I had addressed early on. One I remember that I told you about, in the writing group I was in Adelaide on the weekend away together, we decided to just write for 20 minutes, then read to each other with no comment at all. We keep doing that all morning and see what happens. It's like an experiment. And my first piece I wrote about the M word, the word murder, that you can't write about that in a personal way. And I read it and we went off again. And as the morning progressed, we picked up on each other's themes. And it turned out out of the 7 of us, 4 people had had a murder happen quite close to them, and none of them ever spoke of it. So I think I often go back to that morning. I think it really helped me to keep going. These things that felt unsayable would find a place somewhere.
With that idea of murder in the background, you, when you were writing this book, became obsessed with finding your older sister Alison's death certificate. Tell us what you did to find that, what you found.
Well, as I wrote, what happened around Alison's death became a kind of central question. I begin the first sentence, I think, is something like, there's a grave in our family that was never visited. So it was kind of key question, and wasn't in any family papers. There were no photos of her. There was nothing. And eventually, when I tell the whole story, I tracked it down and down. Eventually, in Sydney birthdays and marriages, someone let me. She said, "I shouldn't be doing this," and she got the death certificate up on the screen and had to blow it right up because there was a whole line and a half that had been scribbled out. This is an official document. Maybe some of you have birth certificates or death certificates that got scribbled out bits on them, but I thought it was pretty unusual, and so did she. And we together managed to work out what it was saying.
And what did it say?
Well, it just had details about, she said the baby was in the bath or something about the bathtub. So it was not so much that it was new information as that it was clearly too much information. It was too much information for the people filling in the form, and that decided to shorten it. So it actually fed completely into my story and the feeling that what had happened in our family was too much.
So you write the book when you're, I gather you're probably about 9 or 10 years old. You come home from school one day with your brother Mark, and your mum's not there. Mark is here. Oh, hi Mark. And your mum's not there. And so you get the sultanas and apples out for Mark to have his afternoon tea, and you don't know where she is. And it turns out your father finds her at the police station. Tell us what that was about.
It's interesting that to us, I think this was one of the smaller moments, the fact that she had gone and given herself into the police. And at the time, that just mentioned, sort of said that, go to bed, life went on. And it was only later that I really understood that she was in the habit of going into periods of feeling terribly guilty and giving herself up for something that nobody else could see or believe.
Perhaps you need to explain what it did say on the birth certificate about the reason or cause for death was your mother was bathing a 4-month-old daughter.
And said that she fainted and the baby drowned.
And that bath ended up staying in the family, and you were bathed in it, and Mark was bathed in it, and it stayed in the family and was used for all sorts of things for years.
So they're long enough to Mark and I left home.
So, when you were writing through this, and again I come back to the fact that you say you've done all the therapy and you need to tell this story, but again I can't help but think of how painful it must have been at times writing just with sad, well you don't actually express a great deal of sadness, but it sounds sad to me how remote your mother was from you as a young girl growing up, and your brother. Very remote. It's almost like every time you mention her, she's not quite looking at you, she's always looking away, she's looking out the door, she's in another world. It was almost like you grew up with a mum who wasn't there.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's right. You got it.
So, but writing about that was painful.
Of course, I just finished reading Sassafras last night, Rebecca Huntley's book about her therapy journey with MDMA in her book. And she writes beautifully about so clearly about what trauma does to the mind, to the way that memory forms, and as you do the therapy, however you do it, it unwinds the ways that you have twisted into, straightens them out, but that you can still always see the sort of sticking properly back together. You can still see the cracks, but you know what they are now. And so you are, in a sense, a bit removed from the trauma. So writing the book, I felt like that, but it's true, it's an incredibly sad story. And I actually believe, because I've been talking to other people about other situations, any family that has schizophrenia in it, everybody has a broken heart. I'll tell you, absolutely.
How did your mother express love for you?
I've been quiet and sort of just there, doing the washing, folding clothes, putting them in the drawers, sort of keeping a kind of neatness behind our lives. But I tell some stories about being sent to school without my hair done and being humiliated by a teacher, yelled at. And sometimes the lunches were wrong and weird and other kids laughed at us. But generally at home, there's one passage where I talk about how she used to wash my hair. And that, I was very pleased with how I got that on the page and the sensuousness of it and the pleasure, the deep pleasure. But I don't remember her ever actually cuddling me or saying I love you or anything like that. It's just she was sort of there and doing the minimum, but doing that quite sort of well.
There was a moment too you write about where you were all going out as a family and you were getting ready to go out into the car and you couldn't find your mum. And your father told you and your brother to go and look for her, and you found her in the cellar, I think it was, and she was vomiting and she had consumed rat poison. When you went back upstairs and when your father said, did you find her, you said no. Why?
Yes. Just the way he said he sent us to look for her, he was looking for her too. We went in 3 different directions and I was sent down to the cellar. And found her there. I can still see her. She's bent over, vomiting her best dress, vomiting on the dirt floor. So I knew that, I just knew something terrible was happening. I didn't know what. And when I went up, and Dad said, you know, what happened or something, I said, no, she's not there, or I didn't find her. But he looked at my face and went straight down there. And I think it was, you know, it's that thing of childhood, of feeling things are too big, and there's no words, and you don't want it to be true, so you say it's not.
Did you, growing up, feel ashamed or just hurt, confused by it?
There were times I felt very embarrassed, and I guess that's the kind of embarrassment that's shading into shame. I wish this wasn't in my family, I wish that wasn't my mother, looking so weird. There were times like that, yes. And I don't beat myself up for that. But mostly there was this quietness around her, and so this sort of quiet shame.
Did it change though with time, or did it dissipate with time as you got older and moved beyond and you were living your own life?
She became more and more strange as we got older in our teens. It's much more obvious there was really something wrong. So no, that didn't. But kind of sort of ignoring her or just leaving her in the kitchen, or life went on in another room, became much more common. And I think that kind of even translated into public life. She mostly didn't go to other things, the things we went to, but if she did, she didn't speak much and we didn't include her.
One of the title bits in My Mother's Hands, what was it about your mother's hands?
I can't remember all the detail, but I do know that the title was a bit of a battle with Alan and Owen. And once it became, it has to be about her hands, there was a lot of arguing about the preposition, at or in or with. And once it was decided in my mother's hands, I went back over it and found the times when I'd mentioned her hands in whatever way, including doing my hair, which was beautiful. And I went back and checked that in every chapter, in the 16 chapters, the hands were mentioned in some way, so they became a motif as well as a point of the whole thing. And there's a piece in there, if you haven't read it, where I describe how she mutilated her hands. She had an absolute thing about her hands. We covered up the mutilation with gloves from the age we were about, I can't remember, 8 or 9.
When you read that in the book, then the front photo, which is a lovely photo of your mother in a gorgeous frock, wearing white gloves, becomes suddenly a different kind of image. At first it looks just formal and lovely, like she's going to an evening outing or something, and then when you realise she was gouging her hands, and that had become part of her illness.
And there was a moment, I was sort of writing a retreat, and I got to there, I cannot describe, I cannot find the words to do this. I wonder if I could have this in the book, what she did to her hands. And I was doing some yoga on the floor in a study area. And it suddenly some words came to me, and I leapt up and wrote them down, and they essentially are how I ended up describing it. I could find the words to this. You know, I've never heard in any other family what she used to do, so it was unique.
Biff, when you finished writing this extraordinary book, what was the impact on that for you? Did it expunge some of the pain or the long-held grief, shame?
I think it did. There's something about getting a story like that. So you hold it in your hand, but it's outside. There is a version of it that is outside you, it's outside me, and that other people could engage with, that made it further away,
on your writing life, being listed for the Stella Prize?
That was a pretty exciting moment. I think it was a young woman called Emily rang me from the Stella, and she was really excited to tell me that I'd been longlisted. And so I was really excited too. Of course, it was an amazing moment. It was certainly the best thing that happened to me after the publication of that book, that moment. The other wonderful things, a few people who told me that their experience of reading it and that they had similar, often mental illnesses, and in one case, two sisters read it aloud together who never talked about their mother, and that was pretty a story.
Biff, I'm going to move on to, there's so much more I've asked you, but I'll move on to the third chopstick. Now, this was published in 2019, but self-published? Oh, sorry, 2022, 2022, so very recent. Self-published, but this is a book that you started writing a long time ago.
1997.
Wow, and then put away and came back to, what, can you tell us briefly why you put it away and then what brought you back to it?
So I started meeting Vietnam veterans in 97. I've been obsessed with the war during it as a protester and never left me. Seemed to leave everyone else, all my comrade protesters, sort of got over it and went on, but always stayed inside me, the Vietnam War, and I used it often as a metaphor for all sorts of things in life. It stayed alive. And eventually some situation occurred where I met a Vietnam veteran who turned out, I chose him myself out of a group of them, but he turned out to be sort of the guru veteran who helps anyone who's trying to write or film or do anything about the Vietnam War. They always get sent to Graham. And I often was told, well, you need to talk to Graham Walker. And I always said, I can't do myself. So I started, he enabled me to start meeting veterans, and these amazing interviews just started to unfold. I was so curious. I wanted to know everything about the military experience. I had three questions. How did you get into the army? What happened in Vietnam? And how have you been since? That was it. And most of them went for an hour and a half or 2 hours. They often the men cried. So it added to my experience as a protester. It was like the war was opening up to me. And I should say, through these years, I didn't read anything except memoirs about the Vietnam War, mostly from American soldiers, because there's a lot of them, and the Australian ones. So I was just deep in war. I went to a seminar at a general who'd been there, and I understood every acronym. And I tell you, that's something. So, you know.
I don't know if that's really a claim to fame, to be honest.
It felt like at the time I was thrilled because, you know, I wanted to know, and I did. I was learning. And
You also visited Vietnam countless times.
Yes.
And took tours there as well.
Yes, later on. I took tours there because my friends started to say, we want to go to Vietnam, we want to go with you because you make it sound so interesting. Okay. But the reason, there was one particular veteran, Ray, his picture is at the end of the book, it's the only picture in the book. Ray Fulton was the craziest, the most articulate, the scariest, the funniest. He would have been a charismatic person even if Vietnam hadn't happened to him. And I became enthralled to him. He wouldn't tell me his story, but he would talk to me for hours on end. He wouldn't tell me his personal story, and there was a secret in it. And in the end, I sort of structured a book around Ray and that secret, which did only come out very late in the writing for me. So I was working on it for 4 or 5 years, nearly thought I was there, when Ray just cut me off, which he did to many people in his life. I thought I was special and he wouldn't do it to me, but it was.
What was the way he did that to you, and what was your understanding?
He rang up on Saturday morning, I think, and he said, something to the effect of, you can't use me, you can't use my name or a pseudonym, you can't say a single thing about me. Over. And hung up.
What prompted that? Because you've been talking to him for a long, long time.
Ray had that famous veteran trigger rage thing, and I don't know exactly. I have theories. Not long before the only time into my house, I usually met him somewhere else. I went to his house up in the bush, Majors Creek. I think seeing my house might have made me a bit uncomfortable or something, and he just went, oh, get her out of my life. I don't know.
What fascinates me, Biff, among many things that fascinate me about your work, you invest so much time and energy and love really in those people you interview, and it really shows in this book. You don't just interview them, you become friends, you become confidants, and you really know them. So it must have hurt when Ray went up and out of the blue and just said, I don't have anything to do with you.
It hurt incredibly. It hurt personally, and it devastated the book. And after a bit, I just put it away. I could not fix it, couldn't keep going without him. And some years later, he died of cancer, which lots of veterans do from Agent Orange. And I didn't know at the time, but after I'd heard that and written in my mum's hands, which was my trauma, and I think that was part of my connection with veterans, this feeling I had some idea of what this PTSD thing meant. After all that, I thought I'm going to go back to that book now, but I had to get permission first, so I rang Graham and said, I want to go on with the book. He said, good. And I said, but I can't because of Ray. I want to write about Ray. And he said, oh, but don't worry, he did that to everybody. He'd be thrilled with your book.
But he was dead,
Keep going.
at that stage, he was dead.
Ray was dead. And Graham just opened the door. Keep going. Do you want him to meet his wife? Yes. He married someone just before he died, weeks before he died.
So when you did meet the woman that he married just before he died, who sounded like a pretty jolly, extraordinary woman, she gave you a manuscript of Ray. Tell us about that.
Yes, Ray had written his story, which was when I was talking to him in one phone call. He said, I've been writing, it's great, it helps you, so I feel much better, get it out on tape. And I didn't know what this writing was. He wouldn't show me at the time, he hadn't dreamt of it. But yes, after he died and I met Annie, she said, do you want this? I can't read it. And gave me 70 pages of his hand, slightly blue handwriting. So it was the most incredible gift. And it tells very explicitly the secret, the story that had so undone Ray, that made him so crazy. And it was to do with what is in fact a very, very common kind of incident, but which you don't hear of usually in your books. And that is so-called friendly fire, but not just a vague general fire, but oh yes, we put some artillery too close to our troops. This was actually shooting two of the people in his own platoon in a sort of mistaken situation, one of whom died. And also circumstances meant that just after that he became very ill, turned out to be an encephalitis, and he got taken out and ended up coming back to Australia. So he never saw any of those guys again. And he believed that they all wanted to kill him, that they were furious with him, that they blamed him. So it had become this thing that consumed his life.
Well, in the writing, and he was actually a really good writer, wrote really beautifully, but in that manuscript that you're reading after his death, the way he describes, and he really strong detail the night when he shot two of their own men, thinking that they were the enemy. And as soon as he let off all the rounds, he knew one of them was dead and one was injured. And he could hear from the breathing that one was injured, and he still thought it was Viet Cong. And then the realisation when he worked out where his own men were, when he realised in fact they were his men or our men, whatever you call it. The way he describes the devastation he felt, I don't know if it's really like that, it was just so incredibly raw. And then, yes, as you say, he was taken out and he thought everyone in that platoon wanted to kill him. Then we go full circle, your own cousin, Hugh, turns out who was also a soldier in Vietnam, turns out was a friend of the man who shot dead.
Yeah, so that she's given away the exciting bit right now.
I couldn't help myself, it's a great story, you've got to read it, it's so well.
The story was there anyway, and then there was this additional bit, which turned out my second cousin, Hugh, who I interviewed, the stories in there, was best friends with the man that Ray shot. And most moving to me, Hugh, this is 30 or 40 years later, was had always really worried about the man who shot him. Look, I hope he's all right. I hope he didn't get bloody. So that was far too late for Ray, but very moving.
If only Ray would know. I'm going to throw it open to questions, but just...
I just want to say one thing, in case anyone's wondering, going back to the rape problem, my feminism, because I myself often in this Vietnam project wondered where my feminism was. I mean, I knew it was there, but I could see that people would be puzzled. And some of my feminist friends said, what are you doing? And I just wanted to say, there's moments in there where I mention my feminism and how I operated in this situation. But no matter how close I got to any of those veterans and that whole story, I never resigned from my protesting. I was able to hold them both at once. And all of that is part of the insanity of war.
Did it change your views of war at all?
No, it just means I know a lot more about it. Had some wonderful moments of mansplaining. Imagine, you know, a woman writing about war, that's straight away something maybe I just met. Start telling me about the Vietnam War, and I'm going, really? How many books have you read?
Biff, I do just have to ask you, given this has been such an intense story in our own media over recent months, the protests here in Australia, around the world, particularly in Australia, against the Israel-Gaza war, you were right at the front line of Vietnam protests. You were there all the time. When you're watching this play out now, what are your thoughts about these protests?
I was interested to see the state of the lawn when I got here, recovering from that wonderful camp. I've seen the Gaza protests as the first time I've seen kind of Vietnam repeated. And I think some of it is because it's the first time since Vietnam that the American military isn't controlling Libya, like Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. I hardly saw any images really of what was happening. But in Gaza we are, because the American military is not there. And I think it's fascinating that the whole new generation of young people is immediately going, no, this is right, wrong. And watching how they're becoming very knowledgeable and reading and learning, and it's very, very similar, and I applaud them. And I go myself sometimes.
I'm going to throw this open to questions. If you have a question, pop your hand up and we'll get a microphone to you. While people are thinking about their questions, if I want to ask you too, if you've been writing now, writing all your life, you're now 82, 81, 81. What, if there's anything you would change about your writing life, what would it be?
Look, not really. I think I just had a very privileged, lucky life. And to be able to write in my retirement like this and have two books come out is just extraordinary. I just feel very lucky. I will confess that just in the last few years, I had a little bit occasional thought of, oh, I wish I'd written more earlier and done more books. But what I was doing instead, making a living, the way I was making a living was deeply satisfying and felt very political, and that's what I did.
Well, I for one, but I think on behalf of everyone here, can say we are so glad you have done what you've done. Every book is distinctly different. Every book has been an important contribution, and we are lucky that you've done what you've done. And ladies and gentlemen, I think we're going to have to call it halt there because we're just right on time, I think. So would you please very warmly thank Biff Ward. And don't go too far away because we have another session coming up. In fact, we've got two sessions. The next one, Fiona.
Is it 12?
12,
12.
12:30. And then the following one with BJ is at 2, which goes through till 3:30. Some fantastic discussion yet to come. Thank you so much to everyone who's come along today. It's very, very much appreciated. Lovely to see you here. And the books for sale downstairs, and Biff's going to be doing some signings. All her books are down there, so grab them.
Yeah.